Well, hi there. Welcome to ChessBase Workshop. My name is Steve Lopez. Thank you for clicking on the link and joining us today. Last couple of workshops, we've been talking about search functions in ChessBase and Fritz, the kind of searches you can do that can be done in both programs. I talked about it last time around about the law of diminishing returns. The more information you put into a search, the less stuff that you tend to get back. The more specific information you look for, the less stuff you tend to get a return on. I'm in kind of an embarrassing situation here right now, which is that I have more material than I have time to cover in workshops. We have a new ChessBase coming out in the very near future, and we're going to be talking about that, but I'm going to talk about that in October. Right now we're still working on September workshops. So I'm going to do a couple more things with searches that will still apply to the new ChessBase when it comes out, by the way. So we're going to talk about searches a couple more times, and then we're going to move on. But the searches we're going to talk about in this particular workshop also apply in Fritz and in Ribka and in the playing programs. We're going to talk about the general game data searches. They're header searches. You're searching header information. What's a header? Well, when you go down in a game list like we're looking at right here, this stuff is the header. White player, black player, result, any ELO ratings, tournament year, ECO code, number of moves, etc. Just header information, stuff that's in the game header, not stuff that's actually played within the game, such as a position search, a material search, a maneuver search. That's a different kind of search. Some of that stuff can be done in Fritz. Position searches can be done in Fritz, for example, but you can't do maneuver and material searches in Fritz and Ribka and the playing programs. We'll look at them a little bit later, but we're going to talk about the general searches. We did talk about player searches in the search mask in ChessBase and Fritz. I'm using the Mega Database 2010. We right click on the icon and click search, and it brings up the search mask. We looked at player searches. Remember, it's last name first, then the first name. First initial is usually sufficient to get what you want. Kasparov G, for example, will pull up Gary's games, but you do occasionally get situations where you get stuff you may not want. If you type in Karpov A, you get Anatoly Karpov's games. You also get Alexander Karpov's games. So if you want Anatoly's games, you should type in AN. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily want to put in the whole first name, because sometimes people put games into a database and they just use first initials, and you'll miss those games. It's hit or miss. A lot of what happens with search masks really depends on the quality of the data that you're using. That's why when people say, why should I pay for the Mega Database from ChessBase when I can download bazillions of games on the internet, part of what you're paying for when you get the Mega Database from ChessBase is that quality of games. They go in and they standardize last name spellings. You'll remember a couple weeks ago we talked about Korchnoi and the bewildering myriad labyrinth of games, or of names, spellings that Korchnoi's name can appear under. Same thing with Nimzovich. You wind up with standardized spellings. You wind up with basically cleaned up data that makes your searches easier. That's part of what you're paying for. And with Mega Database, you also get a whole lot of annotated games as well, which you generally don't find on downloadable internet databases. So your search results tend to be only as good as the quality of the data you're working with, as well as your skill at using the search mask, which is why I'm bringing up some of these things, like put in the last name first, and for the first name, start with the first initial. If you wind up with more than one person, you can fine-tune it later and maybe use the first two, or possibly in some cases 3 letters of their first name. So we talked about that. We talked about the players and ignore colors and wins only. Tournament. You can do tournament searches in ChessBase and Fritz. This is one of my favorites. The reason why is I have fond memories of the Linares tournaments of the early 90s. You can type in Linares and click OK, and it'll take a few moments for this to happen, but what it will pull up is all the games that are played in Linares in Spain. 1978 is where this starts. If you scroll down a list, you wind up with a little over 6,000 games going up to 2009. So that's a lot of games. You might want to narrow it down. One way to do this is, for example, go back to the search mask and pick a year. You can put in a year or a span of years. You could put in 1990 to 1992. By the way, these little arrows will increment the years up and down. So you can use those as well. I prefer to type them in, but it's up to you. Now we're doing a search for Linares tournaments from 1990 to 1992. We click OK, and we wait a few moments. And now we have 1990 to 1992. And there's a whole bunch of tournaments here. Notice that it isn't necessarily just the Linares Super Tournament that tended to happen at the beginning of the year. There's some other stuff here. There's the championship from Linares. There's the Spanish team championships played in Linares. Very popular place to have chess tournaments. So you may have to narrow it down even further. So what we're going to do is this. We'll go back to our search mask, and we'll just make it 1992. And click OK. Narrows the search down to 1992. We have the 10th Super Tournament as well as some other events. We have another event in there as well. There's a Linares match also between Anand and Ivanchuk. We're just going to look at the Super Tournament games. If I really want to narrow it down, I can type in Linares 10th for these additional searches. But I'm not going to do that. It's not worth it. I can just scroll down. I can see what I'm looking for here. You can narrow down searches even further. You can go here to search. And we've got Linares 1992. Let's say we only want to see how popular the King's Indian defense was in that tournament. The reason why I bring that up was that in the early 1990s, the King's Indian defense was crazy popular, due in large measure to Garry Kasparov playing it a lot. I happen to know the ECO code for the King's Indian defense is E60 to E99. Now, we'll look at this in a second. I want to show you this search first, and I'll show you something else here in a moment. But we'll click OK. And this narrows it down even further. We wind up, in the Super Tournament, we wind up with 8 games. The King's Indian defense has played 8 times. And there's Garry on the black side of it 4 times of those 8. I told you it was very popular. Oh, I'm sorry, is it 4 or 5? I think I miscounted. It's actually 5. 5 times out of those 8, it's Garry Kasparov. So I told you it was popular because of him. He played it almost exclusively as black against 1D4 for a very long time. So we'll close this up. We were talking about ECO codes. How do you learn them? Nobody knows them all. If you come to me and say, what are the ECO codes for the English? Man, I don't know. I don't remember. It's A something, but I don't remember the numbers exactly. Generally, you tend to learn the ones of the openings that you play or the openings that you deal with a lot. And the way you find, one way to find them out is if you have mega database, and it may work with big database as well. I'm not sure because I never downloaded the big database from ChessBase since I had the mega one. You'll see I have an icon for big database, but all that is the mega database with the annotation stripped out. I did that myself. But if you have mega database 2010, double click on it to get to your game list. And if you go to openings, the openings tab here at the top, you will see Mr. Junka's super key, and you'll notice that there's ECO codes and there are names. BO2 to BO5, Aliek is the fence, BO7 to BO9 is the Pirc, Caracan, French. Open games, big blanket for C20 to C99. Sometimes you can click on the little plus sign and expand it, and you'll see more openings, and you can scroll down that list and get even more fine-tuned. C60 to C62 is the Spanish, but then there's other Spanish variations. It turns out that basically C60 to C99 is the Roy Lopez, and this tells you where to find specific variations of the Roy. So that's how you can learn ECO codes. There's a lot of names and codes matched up in the super key. It's not comprehensive. There are quite a few openings, particularly obscure ones that do not have the names in the super key. But it's a good start, and the internet is your best friend when it comes to looking for this kind of stuff. You can get online and you can find out the ECO codes for various openings. So the ECO code searches are something you'll do a lot when you do searches using the Game Data tab in both ChessBase and Fritz. Something else we can fool around with. Let's go ahead and unclick ECO. We've got Linares 1992. Moves. You can do move numbers. Games that were between 1 and 22 moves long, and you can modify that as well by going to Result. Just to give you an example, let's look for short draws. The proverbial Grandmaster draw that you hear about in large tournaments. Let's see how many there were at Linares in 1992. We click OK, and we wait a couple of seconds. And here we go. The 10th Super Tournament had 2. All the rest of these are from another, separate event. So there were 2 Grandmaster draws, or 2 draws. I'm not going to say they were Grandmaster draws. They may have been well fought. We'll have to look at the games themselves to really make that determination. But you can see that, well, let's just go ahead and fire through it. Yeah, they look like they're playing. We got some exchange action going on. So it wasn't just, hey, let's just throw a few moves out there and we'll call it a day. Looks like these guys are actually making an effort. That's cool. So we'll go ahead and close this up. We'll go back to the search mask for another idea. Want to talk about the results section, which is kind of interesting because there's been some additions to it over the last few versions of ChessBase. Result, if you don't know what this means, 1-0 means white wins. 0-1 means black wins. 1/2 is obviously a draw. You can mix and match these, but some of them make no sense. For example, if you click white wins and stalemate, that would be dumb. You're going to get nothing because there's no such thing as a white win stalemate. Stalemate's a draw. Likewise, you wouldn't have to click stalemate and draw because a stalemate is a draw by definition. So you just click stalemate. However, if you're looking for games that end in mate, you can click, for example, white wins and mates. These are games in which white checkmates. ChessBase does a very interesting thing, and that is that if it's a mate in 1 on the board, when one player resigns, it will still come up in a mate search, which is pretty neat. It's kind of a cool way to locate mate in 1 chess problems. I've written about this in the past, and it's a neat thing to do. Same deal here. Black wins that are mates, it works the same way. You could click draws and mate at the same time, which again would be dumb because that would be pointless. They are mutually exclusive. Check, games that end with a check. Cool thing, you can find some interesting little chess problems that way as well, just like clicking the mate button. This one is interesting. This is fairly new. 0-0. You may wonder what that is. Well, let's find out. I'll show you. I was looking at this earlier, and it's a pretty cool little thing, especially if you're a chess writer and you're looking for games that are kind of theoretical, where either we don't know who won them, or the games are incomplete, or it may just be an analysis line kind of a thing. Here's a John Cochran game from 1852, and we don't know who won. It ends at this point, but we don't have a game result. So we don't know what happens. It may be an incomplete game. It may be that the players may have drawn at this point, but it was never written down, never recorded that it was a draw. So what we have here is a game where we don't know for sure what the result was. That's what the 0-0 in the search mask will pull up, is all games that do not end with a listed result. That's what the 0-0 is. Another way to modify your searches, another way to tweak them, is you can search for games by ELO rating. By the way, ELO is a band from the 70s, Jeff Lynne and his friends. ELO refers to chess ratings. A chess rating, you do not say, what's your ELO, because you're talking nonsense. The man's name was Arpad Elo. He was a mathematician, and he designed a rating system that is not only used in chess, it's also used in professional soccer worldwide, as well as some other pursuits as well. Any competitive endeavor, in fact, can use the ELO system. So ELO is this box right here. None is the default. I'll explain that in a minute. But if you click 1, what that means is that one of the players in your search has to have an ELO rating between whatever the numbers you input here are. You can put different values in. The default, 2500 to 2875. So if you leave this alone, you don't change it, at least one player has to be rated between 2500 and 2875. If you want to change it, one cool way to do it is you go to 2700. That's your proverbial super GMs. Once you hit 2700, you're a super grandmaster. So super grandmasters, one player has to be a super GM if you hit this toggle here. If you click both players have to be in this ELO range. That's a good way to find competitive games between 2 super grandmasters. If you change this value to 2700. If you click average, the average rating of both players has to fall within this range. So, for example, if you back it off to 2400, the average rating of the 2 players has to be somewhere between 2400 and 2875. That's a way to get games played between a grandmaster and a master for example. Because if one of the players is a 2,500 rated grandmaster, the other is a 2,300 rated master, the average will be 2,400, and that will pull up in this search by clicking the average radio button. If you click none, that's just the default. That does not, basically what that does is just means you're not going to worry about ELO ratings. This does not mean that doing a search will not pull up games that have players with a rating. Okay? What that means is you're not worried about the rating. So if you click none and you do a search for anything else, you will pull up games by rated players. Grandmasters, masters, super grandmasters. None is just the default position. What you're basically clicking when you click none is you're disabling this whole toggle. You're not even worried about it. You can, if you have a repertoire database set up, and that's a whole other can of worms, you can click in repertoire where you're looking for games that only apply to games in your repertoire database. It does a comparison. The games in your repertoire database, the lines that you put in there compared to games in the main database, it'll pull up games that are part of your repertoire. Text, any games that have verbal text in them. Good games is a fairly new toggle. I believe it was introduced with ChessBase 10, if I remember correctly. What it is it eliminates what some people consider to be junk games. Simul's, games between low-rated players. I believe it may eliminate, I'll have to double check, but it may eliminate junior championships under a certain age level. Just games that some players don't want in their searches. I very seldom use this toggle. I'm real interested in as much information as I can get, and I'm a bright enough boy where if I look at a game and I see it was played, say, out of a correspondence database between a couple players rated about 700, I'm not going to even look at that game. I can just see it on a list and not even bother, unless, of course, I'm writing a article or something aimed at beginners, in which case that may be exactly what I'm looking for. Another reason why I wouldn't use the good games toggle. But it's up to you. If you want to use it, it's there. So that's the basic breakdown, the major functions of the game data tab, this particular tab when you're doing searches in ChessBase 10. It does header searches, and it goes in there and it finds, it just looks at the headers. These searches tend to be very fast, by the way. They tend to be very rapid because it's just looking at game data in the headers. It's not necessarily looking at the games themselves. If it is for things like result or mate, check, stalemate, whatever, it's tending to look only at the last, the final position of the game. So it blows through these searches pretty rapidly. So that's how you use the game data tab. You can use this in ChessBase. You can use this for Fritz. To find games, to look at, to play through, to study, to enjoy, both for study purposes. If you're doing a search, you just want to look at games of, let's say you're reading about Capablanca, you can type in his name. Actually, what I should do is click reset first just to make sure, and I can type in Capablanca. There he is, Jose Raul Capablanca. We can go through some of his great games and some of the ones that may not be so great of the past. Either way, we can play through them if we're reading about Capa. It's a really cool thing, by the way. If you're reading a biography of a chess player and you come to a certain tournament, so-and-so played in a tournament in 1904, you can pull those tournament games up using the search mask, either just by putting in the player name and the name of the tournament, or a player name and the year. That's another good one. I'll show you. Here's a good one. Frank James Marshall, 1904, is a really cool search. This is when he really broke big into chess world and was really knocking everybody on their butt. And you click OK, and you can come through here and you can pull up games of Frank Marshall and see played the Manhattan Chess Club. Then he goes to the Rice Gambit tournament in Monte Carlo. Sylvan Beach is in there. The 7th U.S. Congress. More Monte Carlo. Cambridge Springs, the famous Cambridge Springs tournament. Here he draws with Mikhail Chigorin. So if you're reading a biography of Frank Marshall, for example, and you want to play through his games as you're reading the biography, you read the chapter about Cambridge Springs in 1904, you can go in here and actually follow his progress in the Cambridge Springs tournament by playing through these games one at a time, and it's almost like being there. It's almost like you're watching his games as they're being played. So that's what the search mask is good for. There's a zillion wonderful things you can do with this stuff, and even just a header search, there's some really cool stuff you can do even before you get into position and material and maneuver searches. But we'll look at some of them here after a bit in next week's ChessBase workshop. Until then, my friends, have fun.